equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. Thanks for joining us. I'm Greg Buffkin, and as always, we're so glad you could join us. Today, I'm going to be talking with David Corvi, Charlie's dad, and we're going to be talking about his grief and subsequent healing journey after he and his wife, baby son, Charlie, to stillbirth at 37 weeks. In October of 2021. This is going to be a bit of a unique conversation from the standpoint of most of the time, the guests that I've spoken with about stillbirth or miscarriage have typically been moms. Today, however, our conversation is going to be centered around how stillbirth, the grief that comes from that and the shock that comes from that, the trauma, how that affects a dad. So I invite you to join us now for my conversation with David. David, welcome to our podcast today, man. It is great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for creating this space for us to talk and for parents to connect after child loss. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that, David. Yeah, it is absolutely my privilege to be able to do that. So, David, why don't you take a couple of minutes and just tell our listeners a little bit about you and your family, what you're doing these days, and then we will just dive into your story.
Sure. Thank you. My name's David Corvi. I live in Ohio with my wife and our three living boys, and we'll talk about Charlie, who passed away. I like to say I'm a husband, I'm a father. Sometimes those go back and forth. I'm a father first, or a husband, or a husband
right.
Father, in that order. And also a lifelong educator and learner. I was a teacher, I was a school administrator, and now I provide professional training for school administrators and professional development for them around leadership coaching. My family pretty much loves everything outdoors. We live about 15 minutes from the Cuyahoga Valley National Park here in Ohio. And our boys are outside every chance they get. We're skiers, we're bikers, we're hikers. Other than a father and a husband and educator, I'm a rock climber for over 20 years, and all different sorts of rock and ice and terrain. And so that's really a passion of mine. And my wife and I have been together for 2013. So we're at 11 years. We're coming up on 12 years now, married.
I'm glad you got that right, because she's going to be listening to this.
Yeah, so we're coming up on 12 years, married. We've been together for several more beyond that. We met in college and didn't date in college, but stayed friends and close when we both went to different cities after college. And I pursued her, but rightfully so, probably smart on her part. She rejected my advances for some time. We like to say that she had bigger plans for us. So then several years after college, we did end up in the same city together, and things took off from there. And again, I said we have 4 beautiful boys, 3 living right now, and we're going to talk a little bit about Charlie.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. I also have been looking forward to this too, David, because of the perspective that we're going to be sharing today as dads. Most of my conversations surrounding stillbirth and miscarriage typically have occurred between me and a mom. And I'm glad that I've got a dad with me today that can share what that grief journey and the healing journey looks like from a man's perspective. Because I think it is important for people to understand that while a mom's heart is very unique And the grief that a mom experiences is very unique. As a result of that dads experience grief at a very deep level too. The trauma that losing a child produces is also felt by us as dads. We may not express it like our wives do, and we may not even perceive it or walk it out like our wives do. And as you said in your book, and as our listeners know, there is no right or wrong way to grieve, but it is unique to men. So let's talk a little bit about that. And from the perspective of when we lose a child, that kind of trauma does produce an impact physically. It's mental, it's spiritual, and of course it is emotional. For you, David, what did that impact look like? And what does it look like today?
Yeah, because there's no end here, right? This is ongoing. This is now a part of us. And you, Greg, who experienced the loss of your son Ryan, I mean, you understand that this becomes an emotional scar you carry with you. And yeah, initially, I think so. It may be helpful for listeners. I can give a little bit of an overview of Charlie.
Yeah.
To give them that context. So we lost Charlie to stillbirth, what is known as pregnancy and infant loss. My wife was 38 weeks pregnant with Charlie.
Yeah. Wow.
So pretty late term.
And David, I don't mean to interrupt, but tell us, when was this? It was in October of 21. Is that correct?
Yeah, Charlie. Yep. So Charlie was born on October 26th, 2021. So he was our third child. We had already had two boys. So we're a boy household. Bless my wife.
My condolences to your wife.
Even the dog has passed away. He lived a good life. He was 15, but the dog was male as well. So my wife was just surrounded by boys, but she loves it. Yeah, so my wife was 38 weeks pregnant in October of 2021. Our boys were 5 and 3 at the time, and their pregnancies and their births were perfectly normal and healthy. And so we didn't expect anything different from Charlie's, and my wife's pregnancy was completely normal as well.
So no warning signs.
No warning signs at all. She was 35, so older for pregnancy terms and everything, but still completely healthy and everything. That was really the only sign. So she wasn't getting any more or less treatment or observations or anything or care than you would. I mean, that also comes into play. You play these what if scenarios. Was she just too healthy, right? And so it was a Monday in October, and we had gone on a hike. As I said, we're outdoors people, so we had gone on a hike. The boys were off for the holiday, and she had taken the day off. We had felt Charlie in the morning. My wife's very attuned with her body and did a lot of monitoring while pregnant. And when we came home that afternoon, she was laying in the living room with the boys, and they wanted to feel the baby. And after a while, she couldn't get him to move. He just wasn't moved. And we've talked about this already, that moms have a connection with their children, and immediately she knew. Immediately she knew something was amiss, something was off. So she went upstairs and laid down for a little bit, and then came back downstairs with her bags ready to go. And she was like, I've already talked to my OB. I'm going. He told me to get to the labor and delivery, get to the hospital. Something's off. So
yeah.
So what we ended up discovering was we got our boys to a nearby relative's house, and she and I went to the hospital, and her doctor's team and her medical team were there, and they brought out the ultrasound, and when they saw the image on the screen, his heart had stopped. And when you ask about, when your question of just what the impact is of grief and everything, that's an image that's burned into my brain.
Yeah.
As I'm sure anybody who has witnessed or uncovered the loss of a child with living children, I can't even imagine, that's just a completely different experience. And so I immediately went into denial, disbelief, just why is nobody doing anything? Can we get him out? Like, how can we save him and anything? And my wife, my wife's a doctor. She's a pediatric psychologist. and works at that hospital and services the NICU. So she has this experience of caring for families and mothers who have lost children. I mean, she was the one who grounded me and told me there was nothing that could be done.
That is just absolutely amazing to think that, here she is just hearing the same news as you, and you as a dad and as a husband, like most of us, when things like that happen, we immediately go into defensive and protective mode, and we want to fix it. We desperately want to fix what we just discovered is broken. And then we discover that, as much as most of us guys like to be in control, we discover that suddenly this is something that is totally beyond our control and beyond our ability to fix. And it's a helpless feeling, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's a really good way to describe it. Yeah.
Yeah. And your wife is trying to help you through this. And as I understand it, she is still practicing as a clinical psychologist, pediatric psychologist in that same hospital.
Correct.
Man, I can't imagine doing that. I mean, it's only been 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about the patients that she sees, I mean, what a blessing it must be to those parents to have somebody like Katherine who's been there and understands, not just because she learned it in her training, but because she's experienced it. So talk about being able to be empathetic and not just sympathetic. Wow.
Yeah, I've always described her as that's the reason I married her, right?
Yeah.
I definitely married up and leveled up there, and she's always been a compassionate, considerate, thoughtful person. That's just who she is in her nature, and she's just always been a wonderful human being and a wonderful mother and a wonderful spouse. But seeing what she went through, physically and emotionally, and again, we've talked about that. It's different. It's different. The experience, and rightfully so. The focus, should be on the mother and the birthing parent, and they take the brunt of it. I mean, she took,
They do.
She has the physical trauma. She has the emotional trauma as well. But she is the toughest person that we know, and she is probably the most amazing person that I know. And
you're a wise man. Yes, and it's all true.
It's all true. It is. Yeah. And yeah, so what she continues to carry with her and what she continues to navigate as she cares for her patients and as she cares for families, as well as she cares for us and her boys, and she cares for Charlie and cares for herself. It's just amazing.
David, I know there are women listening today who have experienced exactly what you guys have been through. They know what it's like at a very personal level as a woman and as a mom. But they probably are, sometimes we as men don't always let our wives in, as it were, at that very deep personal level. And so I want you to try to give that woman who's listening today, she's grieving. She sees her husband grieving. There are some similarities in their journey, but there are also some differences, as we were just talking about. Can you give her just a glimpse into what it is you're thinking at this point, how you're trying to process this, and as you start to walk this out every day in that grief journey, what is it that you're doing? What does that journey look like? Women experience it. It's kind of an all-encompassing thing for women. Guys tend to compartmentalize things. We have buckets for this and buckets for that. So I'm hoping that maybe you can lend a perspective that would help her understand better what it is he's experiencing. It'll give her a better understanding of that. Does that make sense?
It does. No, and I appreciate that question. And I'll speak from my experience, and hopefully this helps. Is, as I said, I had the same reaction that probably the average male has. Right? It was disbelief, it was denial, it was anger, right? Those were kind of the immediate emotions that I felt. I mean, I remember my wife had to be induced and had she delivered vaginally, but had an epidural. The epidural wasn't kicking in. And I remember I almost went over the bed at the doctor, right? So there's those emotions that are happening, right?
Of course.
And even after Charlie was born, the next day in the hospital, as you said, I immediately went to, protect her, fix her, take care of my wife, and get us back to our life, which I don't think is any different than any male would consider, right? It's just like, hey, we were going to have a small service. We were going to just keep this in the family, and we were just going to keep moving, right? And that was
Right.
the initial thoughts and reactions. And it took my sister-in-law's twin brother is a Jesuit priest. We all went to high school together. We grew up together. So he knows me. We played sports together. He was there in the hospital room with us, and it took another person listening to me to repeat that back to me and to kind of challenge that, right? So, for me, I credit myself with being, more in touch with my emotions than I would say the average man, and the ability to kind of go that place. Again, like I said, my initial reaction was one to not go there. It was anger, it was denial, it was protector, it was like, let's just get back to our life. But it took sharing my thoughts with a trusted person who was equipped to be able to listen and hear and surface that for me. That's not to say, again, for wives listening, your husbands need to talk to somebody. I think it's more about understanding that they're experiencing emotions too, right?
Right.
And even if they're not communicating with you, even if they're not talking about it, they're having the same feelings, and they're dealing with it in their own way. Again, right or wrong, good or bad. I do know that there is some statistics about, unfortunately, rate of divorce after child loss is pretty common. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with it. I'm sure that the communication and thinking that your partner may or may not be grieving.
Yeah, that's so important, David, because sometimes appearances can absolutely be deceiving, because we as men do experience the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And when we experience the trauma of it, it's just that sometimes a lot of men don't know how to express it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
And sometimes I think that actually, for some wives, can lead her to think, because of the way she processes things, that maybe he's not even grieving. And sometimes wives get angry about that, because it's like, what is wrong with my husband? Because it appears that he's not really dealing with this like I am. So, what's going on here? Again, it's about the ability to, we hear this term all the time, get in touch with your emotions. But a lot of men just don't know how to express it. So if they do have another man, like you had with your brother-in-law, right? Just to have somebody who understands that you're going through something tough, even though they may not understand it from having lived it, but just to know you're going through something hard, and they've got a friend who's willing to be there, who's willing to listen, who's willing to talk if he wants to talk, but not talk if he doesn't want to talk. Sometimes dads handle this in ways where, we work. Sometimes men can play things together, play a sport together, work on a project together, and in the process there might be some talking back and forth, and that's usually how those kind of deep conversations occur. But it is happening. And so I appreciate you offering that perspective, because I think it does. I think it's important for women to understand how their husbands are processing this just as much as it is for us to understand what she's going through.
Yeah, I think an important question to ask to give women something is, my wife and I were always asking each other, what do you need? What do you need? I think that's very different than how are you, right?
Very, very much so.
How are you can just be, I'm I'm good. I'm fine. Right. And as you said, right, men may not have the ability to communicate and express the emotion that they're feeling. So they're going to go out and mow the lawn. Right. Or
Right.
they're going to go continue on. And again, really, largely that's how I function. I just am up and I'm moving and I'm going. And the way that I'm making sense of this and purpose of our loss of Charlie is through writing a book and through leading his fund and organizing events for him. And that's my meaning making, and that's my sense of doing, right? Which probably, to your point, compartmentalizes my emotions, right? It doesn't necessarily make me have to sit in them and feel them. But I think that question of, hey, what do you need today, opens up a little bit more of the conversation of the ability to then express and talk about anything, right? And I would encourage the men listening to navigate and seek out those things that they need, right? And then communicate that with their partner, whether it's, hey, I'm gonna go do this house project, or I'm generalizing and gender stereotyping, but I'm like, hey, I need to go golf. I want to keep golfing, right? I was a hockey player through high school and some of college, and so I am close with my high school here, my alma mater here, and I said I jumped on the coaching staff for the varsity hockey team, and I got on the ice a couple times a week, and that is something that I told my wife that, hey, I needed to do. I just wanted to go do that. And there's the connection of, movement and exercise and everything in your brain and emotions. But that was something that I said, hey, this is what I need, which was just very different from what my wife needs and what we still need.
Sure. Yeah. But I think what you just shared is so important, and that's giving each other the space to grieve in a way that you need to grieve. It's probably going to look very different, as you just described. And neither one's right or wrong. It's just the way that individuals grieve and the way that moms and dads grieve. So I think your question of what do you need is incredibly important, because unfortunately, a lot of times people who are looking into our situation from the outside, they want to help. And I think in our culture, it's just easy to say, hey, how are you? How are you doing? And if they only knew how we really wanted to answer that question honestly, they'd probably run in the opposite direction, because it wouldn't be pretty. Because, how do you think a parent's doing who's lost a child?
Yeah, and that's right where I was going is they may not want to share. They may not be in a place to share. They may be so overwhelmed. I mean, they are overwhelmed. I mean, again, right? Yeah. We're overwhelmed. Like, yeah, it's a pretty loaded question. And I'm sure, again, it's done with the best of intentions.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, I find that just shifting language a little bit, just shifting how you communicate a little bit can go a long way. Yeah.
It absolutely can. And I want to circle back to something you shared a few minutes ago, because I think these statistics are very well, understood is maybe not the right way to put it. But there are these statistics that are floating around out there that the divorce rate for parents like us who have lost a child are typically very high. I did some research on that a few years ago, David, and to my great surprise,
oh wow,
may or may not surprise you, but what I discovered is that line of thinking actually originated back in the 1970s from an article that a journalist had written that had lost a child. She, in her article, she shared those very high statistics, but she never shared any of her sources. So there have been a couple of 3 different organizations in the decades since then that have looked at statistics of their own, and what they've discovered is that the divorce rate, and it's pretty interesting that all of these sources cite a very almost identical rate of divorce among grieving parents, and it ranges from about 12 to 16%. When you compare that to the divorce rate and the general population somewhere in the low to mid 40s.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even 50%, like we've been told over the years. But the point is, it's actually much less than what most people believe. And I wanted to circle back to that because I think it's so important that parents who are in this season of such incredible pain and trauma, disbelief, not knowing what their lives are going to look like a year from now, 5 years from now, I think they worry sometimes about that. What's this going to do to our marriage? I want them to understand that your marriage is not doomed because of what happened, and they're not doomed because of statistics that you've heard. So I want you guys who are listening to know that there are some statistics out there that support just the opposite. And I think it's just like, a lot of times when we go through something like that, it brings us closer together.
And that's our experience. And I'm glad that I'm glad
ours too.
No, that's wonderful that you took a further step to look into that and everything. Because I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. The human nature is to fall back on things you hear, just some common understandings of things.
Of course,
you don't take. And again, you may not be in the place, you may not be in the space to do that, but you don't necessarily take the time to explore that a little further. Yeah, I mean, my wife and I we are cemented.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Kathy and I when we lost Ryan, we had been married, about 38 years at that point. And so now we're approaching 50, and our marriage is stronger and sweeter than it ever has been. And 10 years ago, we didn't know those statistics. We didn't know the positive statistics, but thankfully the Lord was in our marriage as our foundation to begin with. And I think that also is so critical to how we heal, how our marriages survive, and a lot of other aspects of our grief. And that's something I wanted to ask you too. I know that in a previous conversation, we talked about a lot of this, David. What role did your faith play in your subsequent both grief and healing journey? Because you're still there. Always will be.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, in moments like this, you find yourself leaning back into what you know, and in terms of I'll call it just concrete things. The first thing in my mind was Charlie needs to be baptized, right? Like you go back to the rituals that right? It was baptism, it was funeral, it was that process and those rituals that you lean back to and ground. Like I grew up Catholic, and there's definitely something that was comforting and safe about that. My brother talking to me the night before and saying, "Hey, call Cyril, his brother-in-law, his wife's twin brother, to come in," and he was there the next morning, right? And just falling back on that, and then just falling back on the procedures of his funeral. And I remember sitting there in the church and just, again, leaning into the readings and the process and the procedures of the Mass, right? So I think for me, it definitely it's a place where I seek grounding, right? And I also want to say something that Cyril had said during his homily was he called it rightful anger, right? Rightful anger towards God. And is also something that I definitely experienced as well. It wasn't and again, one of the letters really goes into this that I talked to Charlie about. It wasn't like a recommitment. It wasn't a denial. It was just this and again, I would like to think that this is kind of normal for people. It was just this numbness of trying to understand and make sense of this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of grieving parents express that.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think just like grief, it comes and goes and everything, and the wondering. But like I said, what I fall back to is the belief that these are answers that I don't have and I may never have. And that's the faith part, right? That's the listen, I can go off and give you a list of 24 things that since Charlie has passed have made much more sense now in my life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we talked about it like on our phone call the other week, like, call it fate, call it serendipitous, call it God's work. I mean, there's connections. There's connections here that there's something larger at play. You call it wisdom. You start looking back and you start seeing these connections and these things that lead you to being here in this place.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with God's love, God's knowledge, understanding of, what we need and what we don't need.
Right.
And there are, like I said, I mean, I could go on a list of so many of those connections that can be made. Yeah.
Yeah. David, did you learn anything about God that you didn't know before experiencing something like this?
Well, I think of what I just said. He has a plan.
Indeed.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's more of what is clearer, right? Is there's a reason, there's something behind this that this occurred, and I don't, I'm going along with it, right? I'm going along with his will. I'm putting my faith in that he understands that what happened to Charlie and what happened to us, there's a larger purpose for that, and it comes out in connections like these with you. It comes in connections with other parents who have lost their children. It comes in through his fund. I mean, we talk about like the things that Charlie has been able to do through his fund. Yeah.
And that's something I want to talk about now, because what you've alluded to 2 or 3 different times during our conversation, I want us to focus on for a few minutes, because that's another thing that God's doing through the plan that he has, which is really, really hard for us to even begin to understand, right? In that early season, it's like, how can you possibly do anything good from this? What good can come from the death of a child? But in retrospect, and for you guys, again, it's not even been 4 years yet.
Oh yeah.
I want you to tell our listeners about the book that you referred to a few minutes ago, and about the fund that you guys established as well in Charlie's name. Tell us a little bit about that and what you want to accomplish through both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good segue, and that's the connection, right? If this is God's work that we're doing now, right? This is what we were, I've learned, right? And over the last 3, almost 4 years now, that, this is part of my family's larger purpose, right? So a year after Charlie passed away, we were still reeling, trying to figure out this. So Charlie passed away from a true knot in his umbilical cord, which is why there were no signs of anything medical practice currently right now. Technology, like the umbilical cord, is hard to monitor. So, that's part of the anger. That's part of the trying to make sense of this and wondering, can this be prevented? Can we help other families from this experience? And so my cousin, who I had mentioned earlier, asked to run in a marathon relay, and we, in memory of Charlie, so we named it Charlie's Challenge. And it was, we were both almost 40 then, and we were looking for ways to stay in shape and also to keep Charlie in our memory and everything. And so we ended up running this marathon, and there was a fundraising aspect of it. And we ended up then gifting it to health organizations in the area, hospitals, nonprofit organizations who are providing support for families who have also experienced pregnancy or infant loss.
Yeah, man, that is an important thing.
Yeah. And so after that year, we were like, hey, maybe this is something that we could do, right? Maybe this is where God's steering us. Maybe this is our purpose. This is what we're supposed to do. And so we kind of dove full on into this. So we're coming up on our 4th year. So we have our annual event every year, is called Charlie's Challenge.
I love the name.
We utilize our love for outdoors, and we have a 6-mile walk, a 13-mile run, or a 27-mile bike ride in the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. Each year, our goal is $25,000, and we've surpassed that every year. And we gift that money to the organizations who are doing that much work, whether it's advocacy, whether it's research, or definitely in grief services and remembrance as well.
What a beautiful way to keep Charlie's name out there for other people to hear about, and for Charlie to still be able to touch people's lives.
And that's what we say, Greg. You're proud of your living children. The pride that we have for Charlie and the work that he has done is amazing.
Sure.
And so part of Charlie's fund is also a book that I wrote. So the book is called Dear Charlie, Letters to My Son. And that came from really what we're talking about here in terms of just how I was processing my grief. So I had written some letters to my older children when they were younger and my wife was pregnant with them. I've always processed things better and communicate better in written word than I do verbally. And it was a few months after Charlie had passed that my wife had said, "Hey, I don't think you wrote any letters to Charlie," while she was pregnant with him. You know, life with two kids, and
oh yeah,
and I was like, you're right. And so I started to I sat down, and most of my writings were done in the early morning hours when I just couldn't sleep, or I would wake up and I just started writing to him. And then probably about 6 months later, I had at least 1 or 2 letters a month, and that were just handwritten or typed, whatever I had on hand at that time. And just, it was about what I was feeling. It was about what our family was experiencing, events that we were going through, and just a way to continue to talk to Charlie, to parent him, to be his dad, and to keep up this conversation with him. And one of your other guests, Michael Bullock, he lost his grandson Miles. I happened to meet him. They're from Ohio, and this connection in this network here, and he told me about the book he wrote, and he connected me with his publisher, and then it just went from there. I had the thought of, one, of getting Charlie's story out there, and he's not here to tell his story. So, we're going to tell his story, and the other to, maybe this will be helpful for people to read. And we're people of community and people of connection. And so that's that's how the book came out. Yeah.
And it was just published recently, November, is that right? November of 24?
It was published in September, in the fall.
September, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it's been out, and it's anywhere where you can get books and find books. I also can share, and you can post as well, as a link where people can get it at a discount price and everything to spread that awareness.
What kind of response have you gotten from it? Because I love the title. I love that you wrote letters to your son. I think sometimes people don't know what to do. They want to honor their child. They want to do something to keep their memory alive. Sometimes it's hard to have those creative thoughts. What can I do with this? Anybody could sit down and write a letter if they wanted to. It's not something that not everybody would publish necessarily. But did you find that as you did that, David, that it helped in your healing process? Absolutely.
The letters are arranged, and you can see the themes through them as following this, if you want to call them stages of grief, or, they're not, it's not beads on a string. They're more integrated and complicated than that. But you can see in each letter, there's usually an emotion that's attached, right? There's some kind of phase of grief that is attached to that. Some of the letters that I've alluded to, touch on the disbelief. They touch on the denial. There's a letter around what if, it's a list of what ifs. There's several letters that touch on the idea of, and of faith and what is God's plan here. Most of them all end with some form of acceptance, some form of thanks for Charlie and appreciation for him in our life. I had talked about, there's several letters about my wife, but the one main one about my wife is I tell him the story of how we met, and I thank him, as you said, with you and your wife. I thank him for just really bringing my wife and I together. So on such another level. And I
read that letter. Yeah. For our listeners, David sent me a copy of his book, and I got it just recently, and I started reading some of those letters. And one of the things that I love about his book is his authenticity. and transparency. Because again, going back to some of the things that we've talked about in our conversation, that's not always easy for men to do. But if you're in that season of grief, particularly the early season of grief, I think that those letters that David has written to Charlie will encourage you. I know for me, as I started reading them, I was able to connect with them at a very deep heart level because I've experienced what David has, even though in a different way, because we lost Ryan as an adult. But it is well written, David. And I think I think those letters, whether you read all of them or just some of them, I think they'll be an encouragement to you.
Thank you for those words. Yeah. And I appreciate being able to share it with people and share Charlie with people. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's so important because I think when we share our stories, it connects us with people at a different level than just giving them information that may or may not help them. I think people connect with stories better than just information. And so I think it's important that even though it may not be the easiest thing in the world to think about, when somebody asks you, would you be willing to share your story? I think it's important that we do it. And I appreciate your courage. And I appreciate your willingness to share something that is so personal and something that was so painful, because I know for a fact that God can use our pain for His purposes. And I think as we share those things, we begin to realize that there is meaning and purpose and hope and joy in life again. May not be where you are right now. That might not be what you're feeling. Maybe you can't imagine that could ever be your life again. But as David has shared, God has helped him find meaning and purpose again, right?
Absolutely.
So David, I applaud you for doing this. I thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and join us today and to be a guest. So David, before we go, if there's something that you would like to say to people that are listening today that we didn't talk about during the course of the conversation that maybe you hoped I would ask you about, or something that's you just realized that you wanted to say and didn't, what would that be?
Oh, there's so much. I think it's important. My wife and I think it's important that we have the ability, especially in, just in our current society right now and everything, just the ability to show compassion and have grace for people.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big part of where Charlie's Fund came out of was, my wife and I are educated, affluent, privileged people. And, we had the support of our family. We had the support of clergy. We had the support of people around us. And that just isn't always the case.
That's true.
And so I think just trying to pause and take a second to understand or give people some grace and some compassion of what their situation might be through all of this loss. It's very easy I think the male to female theme is a good thing, right? I think it's very easy for you to quickly say, oh, my partner is not grieving, right? Because they're not displaying these kinds of behaviors or emotions. And that may not be the case, right? So I think it's hard and it's complicated and it's messy.
It is.
I think that's what I think that's what my wife and I hope as well, is that people understand that, grief and loss, it will happen to all of us.
It will. And if it hasn't, just hang on.
Yeah, it will happen to all of us. And this is something that I've, just kind of stumbled upon and thought of recently and other people will grieve the loss of us at some point as well, right? I mean, that is the one certainty.
That is so true.
In this world. So I think it's just finding the compassion, finding the grace to offer that to people is something that we hope for. Because we've been blessed with it. We've been so blessed with it.
Those are really good words, David. And as you said, in our culture, those are words that we really need to take to heart and to offer to other people. So thank you for sharing that. Man, I'll tell you, it's just been such an honor to have you on our podcast today. David Corvi, I think what you're doing for Charlie is going to have a long-lasting impact on the lives of other grieving parents. And what a great way to honor your son.
And thank you again. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for doing this in memory of Ryan and creating the space for people to talk and come to and seek this out. Yeah, I enjoyed our time together.
Yeah, I did too. I appreciate that. And again, it is absolutely a privilege to be able to do it. David, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.